want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. It has been a little bit of a break from the podcast, so we've taken a month off, and we did that last year as well. And so we're excited to be back and dive into some conversation. Maybe Mike can release the edited version of our pre-conversation, because we had an in-depth conversation about the Bills' sorrows. As Rick is, as you all know, Rick is a diehard Bills fan, grew up in Buffalo. Paula has been dragged into that from Chris and the boys. Yeah, she married into the Bills fandom. But has Chris always been a Bills fan? Because like you said, your father-in-law, Don, has always been a Steelers fan.
Yeah, their family is Browns, Steelers, Bills.
So okay, so it's, but Chris has always been a Bills fan. Yeah, so the boys obviously. The boys. Yes, yeah.
This is what it is to be a fan.
Yes.
Deal with it now.
The sorrow.
The rest of your life.
Yeah. I was going to say, as a Washington fan,
you know sorrow.
Yes. I was just say, as a young boy, I knew joy. Like, they won 3 Super Bowls in my youth. And I have not been in my youth for quite some time, and they've not done anything in the last 3 decades. So,
Except
my
change
son
their name.
Yeah, multiple times. And so Angie very much makes fun of us. And she, whenever we get upset about how they do, she's always like, "What? There's nothing to prove that they would do otherwise." And I'm like, then it makes me more mad. But yeah, maybe he can release the video of that only in the conversation. But it is good to be back and dive in a little bit. I'm joined today by Rick and Ed and Paula, and we're going to be talking about our new sermon series that we kicked off a few weeks ago. Follow Me, Holy Week Teachings of Jesus, where we're focusing on the Gospel of John, and we're diving in more to the second half of the Gospel of John, starting in chapter 12 and going through chapter 21, the end. And it's been great. This is the triumphant entry in chapter 12, and then all of the things that take place in that final week in the Gospel of John. So we're going to look at this and really dive in, and I'd love to start with just some unique things about the Gospel of John. So all of the Gospels have some uniqueness to it, but as we study this, and especially as we've prepared for it coming into this series, what are some of the unique aspects of the Gospel of John compared to Matthew, Mark, and Luke?
Well, I believe Paula did some research on this,
Yeah,
so
I know.
we're going to turn it right over to
I
her.
didn't want to sound dumb.
Yeah.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
so you did some research.
All right,
Yeah.
good.
Go for it.
Go for it.
That's good. So lead us off.
We'll
Yeah.
fill in. Or necessary.
Well,
If
obviously, we know John is different than the other 3. And so I wanted to investigate a little bit about why.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main points that I found was just the first 3 were really foundational gospels written to specify the birth, the life, the ministry, the death, the resurrection of Christ. And they were written around the same time frame, but John's was different. He was written almost a full generation after, and so he didn't feel the need, because they laid such great framework to add the same stuff. And so 90% of that book is not in the first 3 Gospels. And so he was able to focus on something totally different. And when he was writing it, he wrote the Gospel after the fall of Jerusalem. A lot of heresy was happening, and so he wanted to make the main point of his book about talking about Jesus as fully God and yet human. And that was something that people were really asking at that time, because it was so much later. They didn't experience the works of Christ firsthand, and so they wanted to know, okay, who really is this Jesus? And so that was his main thrust, to say he was in fact God in human form, and what that really meant for them.
And I think it's crucial to point that out. A lot of times we assume when we look at stuff like, oh, these are the 4 Gospels, they were all written around the same time period. And like, well, yes, ish, but like you said, it a whole generation later from the other 3, which is a big, significant difference.
One of the things that's unique about John is that he lets you know why he wrote the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of chapter 20, and we'll get to it, so I won't steal anybody's thunder. I'm not preaching on that one, but he just says, these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
Yeah.
He just makes it real clear. This is why I'm writing. So that's why he selects just certain days of Jesus' life and ministry.
Yeah.
Very specific days that he selects and events that he selects. The Gospels, there are two miracles that are in all four Gospels: the feeding of the 5,000 and the resurrection.
Yeah.
So John includes those, but everything else that he chooses is unique to his gospel, because that's what he's chosen to do, and that's real clear about the chapters that we're studying now. Right. All of the Gospels talk about what happened in the upper room, but John just goes on about what Jesus said.
Yeah.
Extensive teaching. And so that's what we chose to focus in on, and I'm really glad Rick pointed us in that direction.
Yeah.
Holy Week teachings of Jesus all around the theme of follow me.
Yeah. I mean, because by the end of chapter 12 in John, his public ministry pre-crucifixion and resurrection was done.
It's done.
And then 13 until the time where John records the crucifixion, like you said, is the upper room teachings and what is going on and the washing of the feet and, just there's so much that took place in that amount of time that John really felt necessary.
And even his description of what happened in Gethsemane, it's unique to John. Yep. He's the only one, this is kind of neat, he's the only one that reveals that the guy who cut off a servant's ear was Peter.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably because it was written later. And Mark, most people think Mark got his information from Peter, but Peter was still alive.
Yeah.
And so Mark graciously didn't let on who did it.
Yeah.
But Mark was the guy running naked, right?
Well,
there's I was gonna say.
Well, anyway,
we do wonder about him too.
Yeah, we do wonder.
He was remained nameless. Yeah.
I think the other unique thing about John is he wants to tell us who Jesus was through a lot of metaphors. He's the only one who does that. I'm the bread of life. I'm the vine. I'm the good shepherd.
Yeah.
All these metaphors about who Jesus was and is. He's unique in that way. He doesn't waste his time. I don't know if I call it waste of time, but he just doesn't want to talk about parables.
Right.
He's one of the unique guys. Who's just no use for him. Besides the two miracles, the resurrection, and that's all he cares about, miracles too. He just really wants to focus in on who Jesus was and what he taught. Very unique, and it's a great addition to the other three Gospels, of course. But,
yeah, and I mean, it is a lot of the stuff that was already said, but I mean, it makes sense that it's written a generation later, and then he wants to fill in the blanks. And really, it's like you said, it's almost like not that he's discounting the other Gospels, not that he's saying that they went the wrong route, but it gave him a freedom to then look and focus on, like you said, just on who Jesus was. And, he knew that he could say, reference, all the other stuff in the Gospels is true, but this is additional parts of it. Because even with the four Gospels, there's so much that Jesus and the disciples did in their ministry that's just not accounted for,
Sure.
Because how could it be? And so it is neat to see what his focus was, and just again growing our knowledge of the nature of Jesus.
Even the way he began the book.
Yeah.
Right.
But that was the first point he wanted to make. The beginning was the Word.
The Word was
and
God.
the Word was with
Yeah.
God. Yeah, it
And
just
it's-
it just sets it up for the whole rest of the gospel in the way that he's going to approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he even concedes at the end of it exactly what you're saying, Mel. That Jesus did many other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
If all of them were written down, wouldn't be enough room
Yeah.
in books. So he's conceding there's a lot of other things.
Yeah.
He decided to focus on these things. It's good.
Read the other three gospels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
If you want some more,
there's-
yeah.
there's a lot of others. So as we dive in, we're going to look at chapter 12 and the beginning of chapter 13 today, and just briefly talk about some stuff because there's a ton in this chapter and a half. But as we look at the beginning of chapter 12 and the first 11 verses, we see, Pastor Rick talked about there was 4 characters of this story. We have those in the crowd that converted to Jesus and started following him. We have the religious leaders and Judas who were there, had a great knowledge, experience, and intentionally didn't follow him. We had the disciples who were following but still kind of being guarded. And then we had Mary, who was all in. And this, if you don't know the reference and the story of John 12, 1 through 11, this is when Mary brought the perfume and anointed Jesus with it, washed his feet with her hair, and there was some unhappiness, involved with others that were around. And so, what were some of the differences between these 4 groups at the time that this portion of Scripture was written that really stood out to you?
Well, Rick, you preached on it, so you probably got to start it off anyway.
Well, I just think, when I was reading it over, it seemed like there were unique perspectives from each one of those groups that, the religious leaders hardened their hearts, and Judas, they were still believing the lie that if they just had power and authority and wealth and status, that they would be fine. Whereas, some of the people in the crowd personally went to investigate not only Lazarus, that he really had risen from the dead, but they wanted to see Jesus too. And upon seeing both Lazarus and Jesus, who knows what they heard? Maybe Jesus was teaching there too, but it was enough for them to become followers.
Yeah.
And they started believing in him. So what John says there. And Mary's the disciples. Again, like I said, they're hard to always nail down. But like I said, considering in the next 24 hours or so, they're gonna 36 maybe, depends on what night this is. Actually, this is probably in the next week. They're gonna just totally walk away from, or at least. They question, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say that they're all in like Mary is here. And that's, I think, part of the reason they have a hard time. I think Judas, all the other Gospels say they were all not happy. They were all indignant.
Right.
Judas is just the voice.
Yeah.
And he's the voice because of what he was up to, which nobody knew at the time. But John's writing 30 years later, so he could say, here's the betrayer. So he's just the voice of all of them saying, why this waste, So, and I think it points to that Mary had heard a lot of the same things the disciples did, but she actually believed it. She actually believed Jesus' death was imminent in some way, whether I don't know if she knew it was this week or whatever, but she believed what he was saying to the point that I think she had some awareness of what she was doing. I don't know if she had total awareness. She was doing this as an act of worship and love, but I think she would at least know that, hey, these are some of the spices and ointments that we do for people who are going to be embalmed and buried.
Yeah.
So it's a unique perspective on 4 different groups and how they see this whole scene and how they react to it.
Yeah, I felt like when you were preaching on it, you really pointed out there's a spectrum from unbelief to belief.
Yeah. Yep.
And these 4 demonstrate 4 different places on that spectrum.
Yeah.
You know, and I would say that's a pretty good assessment of the world today.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You got people that are diehard unbelief and absolutely want to get rid of Christianity, you know, and you got people that are curious, and then hopefully you got folks that are all in. You know, I think the spectrum, it's there.
Yep. Yeah, and there's unbelief here in the midst of, some of these, many of these religious leaders were aware that Lazarus had come back from the dead after 4 days in the tomb. Yeah. So it's just downright, we don't want to believe, we're not going to.
Yeah, and
we got too much to give up.
Because of the crowd that was believing, it says real quickly in verses 9 through 11 that there was a plot to kill Lazarus as well.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't just Jesus. Like, hey, this story is leading people to follow Jesus, so this has to be ended as well.
Right.
And it's not only were they looking to kill Jesus, they were looking to kill at least some of his followers, which is crazy to think about. So obviously, as we look at the example of the spectrum of faith, it's pretty easy to say that we should not follow the lead of the religious leaders and Judas. That's not the pathway we should follow. Yep. But
not a good baby name.
Yeah.
Not too many have given that.
I know. I don't think I've met a Judas.
No.
Jude. Well, yeah.
That's as close as you're going to get.
Whenever, so I have an athlete.
The group Judas Priest.
Oh, yeah. I was going to give another music reference, but there's one of my athletes. He's a senior this year, whose name is Jude. I tell him, like, it's "Hey Jude" pops in my head all the time, like when I see him. And he like humors me a little bit, but really, I'm sure he's heard that way too much from older people. So no, but yeah, Judas. I've never met an actual Judas, and so when we look, we know that we should follow Mary's example. And although we can throw stones at the disciples pretty easy because we see it from a distance, we also, when we're being real, realize how easily we can fall into, that train of thought. Just the blindness to some of the truth because they had already made up in their mind. They believed in Jesus. They had given their lives. They had walked away from so much to follow him. But then along the way, they still have their own agenda. And it's really hard because their agenda they think is what Scripture and what their elders have taught them. That when the Messiah comes, he's going to overthrow the Roman government. And so they thought they got to be not only have a front row seat, but like they were part of the right and left, like who's going to be, when he establishes his kingdom. And so they can get sidetracked just like us, especially if we're serving in ministry. Sometimes we can get sidetracked in serving God for what we think is good intentions, but really it's not. And so what does it look like in our lives? I know all of us are in ministry, but like even for those that aren't in full-time vocational ministry, I guess technically you're not in full-time vocational ministry anymore, Ed. But yeah, I was going to say, let's just
technically
getting paid for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like you're in retirement for the pay, but but you're still basically operating as a full-time pastor, just with different roles. But what does it look like to follow the example of Mary today? How do we live a life that is following Jesus, all in, as Rick talked about, on that spectrum?
Well, what I think of is Mary. Mary didn't try to do everything. She just was all in with what she would do.
Yeah.
If you're following me. So I mean, people today, if a person, is committed to Jesus and then says, Lord, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
and then just gives themselves wholeheartedly to what the Lord has called them to do. That's extravagant living. And that's what Mary was doing. She wasn't one of the, disciples going around, and as far as we know, she wasn't involved in the day-to-day activities with Jesus. She was just there when Jesus needed a place. She and her sister were hospitable. He used their hospitality gift, Martha's particularly. But Mary, she was just very focused on Jesus and whatever I can do for him.
Yeah.
That was her mind. Whatever I can do for him. And I think, generally speaking, that's what all of us ought to be about. We can't do everything, but each of us can do at least one thing for him and give ourselves to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I saw that with John, that he actually didn't have to put this in there, but he put in there, Martha served.
Yeah.
So I think he was trying to say, hey, she's all in. She's doing what she's been, and Luke says it too. That's what she's uniquely gifted to do, and she's serving with what she has, and giving it to the Lord. So I think Pastor Ed's right. It's a lot about what unique gifts, abilities, resources has God given to each one of us, and how can we leverage those in a way that it's all in for eternal results. And that's going to be uniquely different for everybody. But Mary seemed to be the one who just wanted to be close to Jesus and worship him.
Yeah.
And that's, I know sometimes people get hung up with how people, some people get just, the minute we hit an opening song, they're in the presence of the Lord, and others are like, man, that's so hard for me to. I'm just trying to enjoy singing.
Yeah.
But everybody's uniquely different, so that's how God's made us.
I also think she's an incredible example of not allowing the environment or the circumstance or people around her to influence her choices. She was committed and faithful and obedient, and she did what she knew she needed to do. And it can be such a trap to be like, well, what will others think? And obviously people were very opinionated about her choices.
I'm sure she realized the disciples being against it. Yeah, I know.
Her eyes were there, so it's just like, what an incredible testimony to say, when we are being obedient to Jesus, it doesn't matter. We shouldn't be influenced or drawn away from what we should be doing for fear of man. So I think she's a beautiful example of that in that moment.
Yeah, and towards the end of chapter 12, we see, as the story changes and the scene changes, we see that some of the religious leaders, or some of the, I forget how it says it, but some of the leaders were believing in Jesus and wanting to follow him, but not because they were seeking the glory of man over the glory of God. And that's, like you said, like, she was not distracted by the glory of man and the approval of man. She was very much focused on, I feel God is leading me to do this. This is what I'm doing. And that really was tremendous. I think, last night I went through a Bible study with 3 other men, and we were talking about, it was the 3rd session in Knowing Freedom, and it was talking, a portion of it was talking about our true identity is in Christ, and not only is our identity in Christ, but we all have a unique calling, a unique part of the body of Christ. And as we were talking through, I really think that sometimes we get hung up on, we think when God gives us our calling for the kingdom, it's going to be an itemized job description. It's going to be a task list. It's going to be all these different things. But both of you guys were talking about just like showing up and continuing for what God blessed you with to use it for his purpose. And so often, and we were talking about this because sometimes, the men in the group kind of like to have things planned out and like to have stuff like this is what is happening and this is my exact purpose and this is, And I was like, guys, I just don't know that that's how God operates. Like there will be direction, but it might be like, this is what you're gifted with, and you don't even realize that your purpose is this small thing, and to use it for God's kingdom in this small way in this season or in this time. And I gave a couple examples. And I really do think, like you guys said, like Mary, we don't have a ton of what she was doing through the ministry, you know, and how much she was there or not there. But we know in this moment what she had, she went and sacrificially, you know, served Jesus and what he was calling her to do. And the term you talked about was, you know, not just the money or the value it had, but there was an extravagant giving. And there was the fact that this bottle that this was in wasn't able to be opened and then resealed. Like it was broken. And then used totally. And I'd love to hear examples, because one of the questions that was super convicting was like, what's the perfume bottle you're refusing to break for Jesus? You know, what is it in your life that you're like, I'll live extravagantly, but not with this? And I'm not going to ask that of everyone, but I'd love to hear, like, what are some examples in your life of, and it might not be financial, but extravagant living? And not extravagant living, extravagant giving. Sorry, yeah, extravagant living. That is not necessarily known, but the extravagant giving.
Your best life now.
Oh man, that phrase just annoys me so much. But anyways, yeah. What are some examples of extravagant giving in your life?
I think I've been on the. There's two answers. That one, if I thought of some examples of Kelly and I being extravagant, I wouldn't even want to tell you them.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Like I want to.
Yeah.
But I could definitely say we've been on the receiving end many times of people being extravagant in some way, not just financial, but in their time, in their prayers, you know, extravagantly praying for us. But there's been multiple times we've been on the receiving end of people's extravagance, motivated by their love for God and their love for us. So, one just small example would be when a guy from this church who's no longer alive paid for my master's program. He just called me in his office, said, "Hey, how much is it?" And wrote the check. I said, "Well, thanks." Yeah.
Especially when it's totally unexpected.
Yeah, it was totally unexpected.
It's just like,
right. If that robs them of the, when you start expecting things like people should be treating me extravagantly. That robs the whole joy out of everybody's. But so it's been numerous examples of that.
Yeah, I think, and I'll go along the same vein of, I mean, there are times where, you know, we've sacrificially given, but again, I think that's not the point of showing when we have. But when I was praying through, and this is going to sound so materialistic, but when I was praying through going into full-time ministry, one of the sacrifices that I just wanted to voice my concern over, like, not that we extravagantly vacationed, we didn't, but we were always, you know, we would always take a trip. And I just mentioned, you know, the fact that that's one of the things I just don't see that we can say, you know, like, and it was just me verbalizing the fact that we had just had our son, you know, a few months before, and like, man, all the family vacations and all those things that I thought about. And I remember Derek saying, you know, hey, I know it doesn't make sense, but God just takes care of things like that. And he has. And like, we've learned how to vacation very frugally, but there's also been multiple times where people like totally unexpected are like, hey, I have a timeshare that we're going to lose points, you know, like, or we would like to gift you a week somewhere, you know, and then it's like, man, because then we go vacation in a manner that we can't afford anyways, you know, and it's such a blessing. You know, and it's very unexpected. And it's also a way of, and that doesn't, if we would have never been on a good vacation, our entire family, it would not have meant that God was not faithful, you know, mm-hmm. But like, it was just it's been a good reminder of God, you know, just, taking care of those things.
It's quite a step down from all those extravagant vacations you took as a kid.
I know.
As I remember.
Growing up with parents in ministry. Yeah. I was going to say that it was not like we had gotten used to it. Yeah. No, they made a point. We would get away.
Yeah. Sure.
But a lot of it was visiting relatives.
Mm-hmm.
But there was other stuff going on. Yeah, but it was not extravagant. It's not a word I would use. No, but man, we had fun. No,
right.
So okay. as we continue moving forward in chapter 12, we really see that Jesus starts to unpack even more what is going to be the overall theme in these sections that we're studying. Hence, the reason the series is called "Follow Me," and it is, you know, the call to the disciples and any other people after that are going to say yes to follow me. He's starting to unpack what that's going to look like. Mm-hmm. We see that he talks about in the rest of chapter 12 some of the costs that will be incorporated with following him, and so we see the call to die to self. We see the call to, as he puts it, hate your life in this world, the call to serve and follow him, and then also to choose light over darkness. Mm-hmm. And as you think about these four costs, what maybe is one that you struggle with a little bit more than the others maybe? A cost that is not that you don't, you know, live and have that cost, but one that maybe you struggle with out of those four.
The hate your life in this world was one I think I wrestled with in my younger years. Mm-hmm. You know, before every person has that season of like, but wait, there is the checklist, Lord, that I must accomplish.
Yeah.
You know, there's that whole thing. As your eyes open and you mature spiritually, you recognize that's not what that means. It doesn't mean you actually hate your life and you're not in this holding period waiting for things to happen, but that the whole concept of being kingdom focused for me has become far easier. And I recognize that I explain that differently to my children. Yeah. You know what I mean? As far as where our focus needs to be, because when you're younger, it's just easier to focus on what's easy to understand and tangible in the right now. Yeah. But I would say for me now, the dying to self is one that I struggle with the most. And it's not that I think highly of myself or I think about myself much at all. It's more I tend to get in the way. I tend to find that I allow myself to get in the way of God sometimes, of what he wants to do in me and through me. That's because I deal with a stronghold of control, and it's something that I'm working to dismantle, but it's allowing myself to step back and say, it's Jesus who's in control of my life, and I'm going to step aside and allow him to be king, and I'm going to follow where he wants me to go. So that's definitely a working area that I struggle with, but I also feel that I'm, you know, growing in.
For sure.
Yeah.
Want to say something?
No thoughts immediately.
Yeah, I think. But I was going to go back with Paula's first one, which is hating your life in this world, because I know Jesus is using comparative analysis there in the sense that our love for him is so strong that it makes everything else look like hate. He's not necessarily actually asking us to hate everything in this world, because there's things he's created in this world, and for our enjoyment, that the struggle always is how much do we enjoy them, and so you know, you go back even to vacationing, you know, how much is too much, you know, how much extravagance is too much, when you look at, you know, where that money could be spent otherwise. So it's always that kind of, you know, I like John Calvin's quote. It's not always that you like something, but you like it too much. It's become too much. So trying to wrestle with that one, and I don't think you never reach this point where you're not going to wrestle with that, where you're not going to wrestle with, am I falling just slightly in love with the world over here or there? Am I watching too much of this, doing too much of that? So it's a good thing that you keeps you on your toes, asking the Lord, is my love for you so much growing, and my love for these things is in good proportion. I mean, there's some things we should just plain hate. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But there's just so many other things that could, made for our enjoyment, could enjoy them, but are enjoying them to the extreme and too much, and has it become too important to you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, having a little moment to think about it here, I think probably I'm struggling the most with dying to self. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing because I think it's because of the phase of life I'm in now. Yeah. You joked earlier about am I working or not, full-time or whatever. But I really... My life right now, every day, pretty much is what I choose to do. Mm-hmm. I'm not working in the sense that I have to punch in, and
yeah.
So, what is driving my choices? And I think if I'm not careful, it'll just be what I want to do.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? This came out in my little mini sermon here on the Sunday before New Year's Day, when I realized, all these years when I've come home from work, I basically pop in the house and go right to my desk or my study area and sort out, what do I want to do now, and what tasks have I got to get done, And it didn't really dawn on me. Why don't I walk in and say, what can I do for you, Connie?
Yeah.
And I think that's indicative of the battle that I have to just... I'm at the point in life where I can do what I want to do. And so am I thinking, what do I want to do? Or am I thinking, Lord, what do you want me to do now?
And I think his, retirement is a real example of bringing to surface what is it you want to do. It surfaces out of your heart what's really important to you when you don't have to do certain other things. Now you get to actually choose. And so what's surfacing in your life that you really, want to do. And I know we're in a small group with just about everybody in our group now has chosen to retire in the past year too. Yeah. But the other unique thing is all of us in that group, and there's, almost all of us have children. Almost all of them were raised here. And almost everybody has a child or two who's not walking with the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking even the last time we met how important it is for our kids to see, I think in our retirement years, that what we thought was really valuable when they were growing up, we think it's even more valuable now. And you can see it from our lives. We're not going to just lay on a beach for endless days. We're going to serve and fall deeper in love with the Lord. I think if our kids can see that, I think that's a strong testimony. They can deny what we taught or, what they heard, but it's hard to deny what people are living. Mm-hmm. And if they're growing in their love with the Lord, even in their retirement years, and you can see that, I think that's a huge testimony to people.
Yeah. It's interesting for those that maybe are watching this, as you were sharing dying to self be your struggle, I was chuckling over here because there's so many other ways where I would say...
Where you would say Ed's struggling and you didn't want to tell him?
No. Yeah. No, where I would say like Ed is the example of dying to self. How you and Connie are living your life right now. And I chuckle because I get it. Like you still have choice of what you do during the day. But like it all starts around the care of your father-in-law. There are areas where God's obviously convicting you that you still need to die to self, but it's an interesting thing to see where you can still like be doing so, like following Christ in that area, so diligently, but at the same time still be struggling in that area, if that makes sense. You know, because that would not, I don't know which one I would have chose, but that would not have been it. No. Like,
Well, let me give a quick illustration.
Yeah.
This just happened the other day. Connie and her sister, you know, are taking turns every other day. Okay. Well, on the day that Joni and Jim were on duty, we got word that a cousin of in the family, her husband was really bad and was being brought home by the hospital, and he was not in any shape that he should be. Joni and Jim got off their day of duty with Bob and went and spent the better part of a day with this cousin and her husband. And I mean, it was really difficult. Really difficult. And this was Saturday. So Sunday morning, they get in there, and I'm on duty until we're ready to come out here to church. And Joni says, here's what happened yesterday, and here's the information, and you think about what you guys want to do today. And my inner self said, bless you for doing that, but I have no interest. You know. And I mean, this is very real. Connie and I, on the way home after church, we were trying to figure out how are we going to talk this over with Joni when she is so gung-ho committed. You know, she gave her day off to do the same thing that she's having to do with her dad. You know, and neither Connie or I were thinking that way at all.
Not even after the sermon, though, on Sunday.
I know it. No.
Oh, man.
We were not.
Right over.
We were not interested. Well, the funny thing is, Joni had called and left a message on my phone, which I didn't get till we got home because I had my phone off here during services. And she said, hey, it's okay. Others in the family are stepping up like they're supposed to. And so forget everything I said to you this morning.
Like, I thought we were on our way out.
We were ready to go.
I did not say that at all.
No. Oh, man. I think for me, I mean, at different times, all of them are a struggle. But the hating life in this world in the sense of like you were saying, liking things too or loving things too much, and it's a tricky thing, you know, because we're called to and I'm thinking of people more than things, you know. We are called to love and serve our family, but you can very quickly make an idol of your spouse or kids or parents, you know. And just it's a reminder of, you know, as not that the more mature in faith we are, the more like ready to get out of this world we should be. But there should be a maturing of yearning to be with the Father, like and yearning to be. And I guess the example I'll use is we always talk about as coaches, and I remember I was really young in coaching. And a head coach was asked, and I was standing with him. This might have been my second year coaching track. And a parent said, so when are you looking to hang it up? And he verbalized something that I have realized, you know, now 25 years later into coaching, of if you're in it for the people, there's always going to be one more. There's always going to be that next athlete or group of athletes that you want to see through till the end. Like there's always going to be, you know, but man, this group of freshmen are really, there's a lot of potential. I'd love to see them through 4 years. Well, by the time they get through to their senior year, there's going to be others that replace. And so I use that example in the sense of like, and what he said was, I'm going to need to know when I'm done no matter what is upcoming. You know, and having a focus of, instead of looking at all of the mile markers in life of, well, God, I'll be ready to, for you to take me home once this happens or once this happens, to have a kingdom focus of, no, everything is pointing to Christ, and having that kingdom focus and enjoying and celebrating some of those mile markers as you hit them, but not having the focus of that's the point and that's the idol. And I think that's something that's, it's a struggle for me in a process to work through.
Also, being kingdom focused, I think it reminds you, like you said, you're thinking about people, reaching the people you love for Christ. That urgency of saying, this does have a timestamp here. I mean, you are, and even more so now, you feel that urgency that it's, I want to share with those I care about. Yeah. And I know who Jesus is because you want them to be kingdom focused as well. So not that you're missing out, but that you're bringing them with, that you're introducing who Christ is to them.
So true. And it is interesting as you mature in your faith, you realize just the importance of that, and the sense of urgency. So as we go towards wrapping up, I would like to talk a little bit about the beginning of 13, a little bit in the washing of Jesus' feet. This was something that was interesting, Rick, and I just never really looked at it this way, and it doesn't mean it's not the correct way. But you talked about in your sermon the fact that, like, you unpacked a story of, as they went, there was not a servant to wash their feet. And Jesus was waiting on one of the disciples to step up and serve. And I could very much picture, like you said, because I know myself, the thought that the disciples might have all been sitting there very ready to give a defense of why they should not be the one washing feet, and also why others should be. Right. I've been in that situation before, where I've been, like, well, that person should do it, I shouldn't have to do it.
Right.
And I guess the question I'd love to discuss real quick was, do you think that's the way it was? Or I've always thought that was a very planned thing by Jesus, that he knew when he was going to the Last Supper, he was going to wash their feet, and didn't have an expectation of having someone else step up.
Okay. Yeah, we know that Jesus planned everything about the Last Supper.
Yeah.
He says, "Go find a room. This guy's going to get." But it's an interesting question. Yeah, you could look at it if you want to look at it as an absolute from the perspective of God's absolute sovereignty, then we would say this happened just like it should have happened.
Yes.
But that still doesn't answer the question. Wasn't in Jesus' mind all the time that he knew he was going to wash their feet?
Yeah.
Or was he hoping that one of them? My leaning toward that is, I think if that was his plan from the beginning, I think he just would have assumed it from the beginning. Everything says that either the meal was done or they were at least in the middle of the meal before Jesus got up. So that's my only leaning to go that way, but I can't. There's no scripture that says Jesus had planned to do this all along or not. Just seemed like to me that if he had planned maybe to do it from the beginning, he would have. And certainly, like I said, he had done all these teachings on serving one another. And, again, Luke's passage says, even after all this is done and they take communion together, there arose a dispute among the disciples about who was the greatest.
Right.
So at that point, I'm thinking Jesus just going like this. It didn't work.
Sometimes they're so frustrating.
Yes.
So frustrating.
Yeah.
You just think,
So I don't know. It's a good question to ask, but I don't know the answer. It just seemed.
My hunch is if one of them had gotten up and done it, he would have jumped all over that, and really, he would have been able to teach basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And one of the apostles would have really felt good because it would have been.
Then it wouldn't have been as much of a debate, as Luke accounts of who's the greatest afterwards. That disciple just
Jesus would have said, there you go.
You can't tell me though that there wasn't a moment that all of them stood there like, oh, oh gosh, like
Oh,
when
yeah.
he stood up like this, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
instant.
Well,
we do
and,
it, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that part of maybe, and again, it's we don't have the answer either way.
Yeah.
It was an interesting thing because how he responds to Peter is Peter says no, like
Right.
it's like someone else should step up. Someone else should step up. Oh, not that person. Like I've been there. I've thought about and I can't think of a specific time, but I remember this exact feeling at the ranch certain times of like, someone really needs to do this. And then when it's my dad that would step up, it's like, well, no, someone else should have done it.
Right.
Like, and then you try to be like, no, I'll do it now. And then,
that's
of course his
totally
response is too late now.
Too
You
late.
should have stepped up earlier.
Tarnished victory. That's what they call that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tarnished victory.
And so Peter had that, no, you're not going to, you don't need to wash my feet. Like, I obviously was okay with eating with dirty feet because we all were, But then the response is maybe where I feel like this was a planned thing by Jesus of just by he responded like, no, unless I wash your feet, you have no part with me. And someone, as we discussed it Sunday night in our small group, because I just asked the question because it really made me like think, and I love that. Like when there's other perspectives given, someone said, "Oh, I just thought he waited till like partway through the meal because that was like a planned for more impactful, like a grand entrance."
Looking for
And I was like, "Well,
prime
maybe, yeah.
moment. Yeah. He wanted to draw attention.
He wanted to let the
himself.
drama build,
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think you're right. The disciples, like I said, I think some of them were just like we would have been embarrassed and shamed.
absolutely.
And that's
Yeah.
Peter for sure. But I do think a few of them, like I said, were also thinking, has he forgotten who he is?
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's why I think John's so strong about reminding us in verse
Yeah.
3 that he absolutely knew who he was,
Right.
and that all power. And Jesus himself reminds them, "Hey, I know I'm your Lord and teacher,
Right.
but if I can do this,
Yeah.
any of you could or should have, and hopefully you will down in the future." But it doesn't always turn out that way right away, at least.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change my last question a little bit. I think we can all agree, and I thought you did a great job, Rick, of pointing this out. And at least I know I felt like the tension you were talking about, I could feel instantly, and so many people in the room, I imagine, were the same. The majority, some people have no problem accepting other people serving them. So many really do.
Yeah.
And whether it's a pride thing, whether it's, something I've said and I've heard people say before, like, no, I serve you, you don't serve me, in response when someone tries to serve. But I guess instead of asking for, the why is it so hard, and we know it's our sin nature and our pride and all that stuff, I would love to hear how have you found God convicting you and working in your life? Because those in ministry, at some varying level, have been served more than others. In the sense of a lot of times people step up in ways that we don't expect to try to help out because of being in ministry. And so how have you grown in that area to let people serve you? And one of the ways I would argue that you let someone serve you is actually admitting you need help. And that might be the greatest, like in your life. So speak to that a little bit to encourage those listening of how maybe if they struggle with letting people serve them, how to work through that. Paula, you leaned forward first,
Yeah,
so
I know, that was insane.
She cleared her throat.
Yeah, I know, and cleared your throat.
Something coming.
Two signs that you had
It's
something
gonna
to
be
say.
awesome.
Yeah,
It's going to be awesome. We're waiting.
Yeah.
I feel like as a leader, your instinct is to serve others. It's your job.
Yeah.
You want to serve your team, your volunteers, the people that you're ministering to.
Yeah.
I think one thing I've come to realize is when I don't allow others to serve, I'm robbing them of their opportunity to worship the Lord.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's not my place. That's not my job to say, I don't need your help, I don't need your help. But I'm taking away from them being obedient to what the Lord is calling them to do in their service. And so I've learned that that's a gift, and that is their way to worship and to serve Jesus. And who am I to say no? And so I really think through that vein as I lead or as I serve with other people or work on ministry teams or whatever you do, that's a really important thing to people, and it's not our job to take that away from others.
Absolutely.
And that was the one point I was trying to, that, we need to reframe it at times to see if we believe that God speaks to other people.
Yeah.
Because we've all been spoken to about helping somebody. So why wouldn't we believe God speaks to other people to serve us? And there may be a unique circumstance where, maybe that person's just motivated, maybe not by God, but just out of guilt or whatever. And you feel like there can be a unique circumstance where you feel like, no, God's got me in a place right now where I probably need to lean on Him more than anybody else. And those are unique times where you might have to say to people, brother, sister, I really appreciate your offer, but I think God is telling me I need to let Him work in my life right now. Yeah. The other aspect of it that we did have time. You asked, I think, do you find it hard? We should all be humbled by people wanting to serve us, and we never want to get to the place where we have an expectation of other people serving us, because we've met people in that condition who expect you to serve them, and that there comes a point by serving them you're not really helping them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the other. We don't want to ever come to that point in our life where we expect to be served, but we're just trusting in God to meet the need however He chooses to. And sometimes He's keeping us in a certain situation because He's got some things He wants to teach us, and He doesn't want somebody to bail us out by serving us. I think those are the minority of times. I'm just saying that's true sometimes. But to try to, I think Paul is right, to try to just remember that that's how God works for us. He speaks to us sometimes. And we're not necessarily doing it for the blessing, but we're doing it to be obedient, and we don't want to rob people of their blessing or of them being obedient by trying to listen to the Lord and serving us in some way.
I've had a good experience in this regard since my change of position here or whatever. Early on, I realized, okay, if I'm going to start changing here and I'm not full-time and I'm not expected to do all these different things, well, then I've got what I've been doing. I need to get more people involved in what I've been doing.
Yeah.
And specifically, it was the visitation. And one of the delights of these last several years has been engaging with 8 to 10 people, many of them couples, who are the visitation ministry is being shared by all of them.
Yeah.
And it is really delightful. And I'll talk to somebody, I'll check on somebody, and they'll say, so-and-so has been here.
Yeah.
And that just gives me a great sense of delight.
Yeah.
I thought, I really should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah. And when you see, I think the other point is when you see the delight that it's given to the person who did the visiting.
Yeah.
Not just the person who received it, but it's the person who did
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Double delight.
Yeah.
Triple delight.
Yeah, because Jerry Hammond is one I'm thinking of that she's part of that ministry, correct? Or is she not?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know that she also goes to Pleasant Ridge once a week and helps Keith with chapel. Well, one of the people that she unknowingly, just how God works it, before she knew, for maybe 2 months, she was meeting with this particular person who was a stroke victim, who was pretty nonverbal. It's hard to understand him, but was meeting and connecting with them. Well, it's Angie's uncle.
I'll be darned.
And so just,
that's
you
great.
know, like then obviously, because she's Grandma Jerry in our family. Our kids still, my daughter says, I have 3 grandmas, because Jerry's always been part of our family.
Neat.
And so just the way that it's been tremendous to see, that opportunity, like you said, building that visitation team and how it's been a blessing to them, but then all the others that they've blessed and the ability of that. I think the example I would give real quick as we wrap up, asking for help is difficult. One of the areas that I've learned to really try to work in is because God has called me to do so many short-term mission trips. And early on, I remember praying, and my encouragement would be, if you pray and ask God for direction in something and you get clear direction, that doesn't mean that you then get to edit it. Because as I prayed through a list of people, and it wasn't at this church, there was this widow that kept being laid on my heart that's a longtime family friend, but she's on a very limited income. She's retired, and it's like, I'm not going to, I don't want to send her a letter because I don't think she has the funds and all this different stuff. And my sister Katie, I forget how it even came up, but it came up. And she very much, I know it's hard to imagine, she spoke very firmly with me about that. And just about you're denying that person the ability to follow God's calling.
Just to
respond.
Right?
And it might be, the smallest amount, but that doesn't matter at all. And then when, so through the years, this person has been supportive in a small amount, but the joy and talking to her, and she's like, I love answering the call to support people because I physically can't go on the mission field anymore. And I wish I could, but that's not what God has called me to right now. And just, the beauty of that. And it's a good reminder to let people answer what God has called them to do in that blessing.
Yep.
Well, thank you guys so much for the conversation. I look forward to continuing talking through John in the upcoming weeks. There's definitely a lot that'll be good to discuss through. And for those listening, thank you so much. We encourage you to continue to dive into the Word in the Gospel of John, but also throughout Scripture, to be led to have that kingdom focus in what God is calling you to do in your purpose. We'll see you next week on Federated Squared Circle Wrestling with God's Word.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Yeah.